never thought the worst night of my life would happen on what was supposed to be a celebration. My name is Clara, and the story I'm about to tell you isn't easy. It involves love, betrayal, silence, and a single sentence that shattered a family. It was my grandmother Helena's 80th birthday, and we had planned a big dinner at her house. Everyone was coming. My parents, my aunts and uncles, cousins, even Daniel, who rarely showed up to family things anymore. I thought it would be a night full of stories, laughter, and cake. Instead, it became the night everything fell apart. The house smelled like fresh bread and rosemary chicken. Grandma had been cooking all day, even though we begged her not to. She was that kind of woman, quiet, proud, never wanting to be a burden to anyone. She wore her favorite lavender dress, the one with little embroidered flowers along the collar. Her hair, silver and soft, was pinned up in a neat bun, and she greeted every guest with the same warm hug and kiss on the cheek. She looked so happy, just to have us all there under one roof again. It felt like the old days, for a moment. We sat around the long wooden dining table, the same one that had hosted decades of birthdays, holidays, and Sunday meals. The room was full of noise. Forks clinking, glasses toasting, kids laughing, someone playing old songs on a phone in the corner. I remember watching Grandma smiling at everyone, her eyes lingering on each of us like she was trying to memorize the moment. If I had known then what was coming, I might have paid more attention to that look. Daniel arrived late as usual. He strutted in wearing designer sneakers and a smug grin, barely nodding at Grandma before dropping into his seat. He was Grandma's oldest grandson, and once upon a time, her favorite. But over the years, he'd grown distant, cold. He never called, never visited, except when he needed money. I don't think she ever stopped hoping he'd change. That night, she even saved him the biggest piece of her famous peach pie. The tension started small, like a flicker. Grandma had just made a toast, thanking everyone for coming, saying how proud she was of her family. Then she turned to Daniel and said something simple, something sweet. She told him she missed him, and that she hoped he'd visit more often. That's all. But Daniel rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. I heard it. So did my mom. But we all pretended not to. Grandma smiled through it. She always smiled through things. But then she tried again. She asked Daniel about school, about work. Just small talk. That's when he slammed his fork down, loud enough to stop the conversation. All eyes turned to him. And for a second, he just stared at her like she was a stranger. And then he said it, the words that broke her. You're just a burden to us. No one moved. The music had stopped. My little cousin dropped her juice cup. Grandma's face didn't change at first. She just sat there, frozen. Then she looked down at her plate, as if maybe she'd heard wrong. But Daniel stood up and laughed, shaking his head, and said it again, louder. You don't even do anything. We're all just pretending. I remember the way her hands trembled slightly as she placed her napkin on the table. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She simply stood up and walked out of the dining room. Not a word, not a look back. The front door closed softly behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. My uncle tried to scold Daniel, but it was weak. My mother looked down at her lap. No one followed Grandma. No one even stood up. And that's what haunts me the most. Not what Daniel said, but that we all let her walk out alone. I got up a few minutes later, heart pounding, and went outside. The street was quiet. Her car was gone. I thought she might have driven to the park or maybe gone to a neighbor's. But deep down, I felt something colder. Something final. Still, I convinced myself she just needed space. That she'd be back in the morning. The rest of the night was a mess. People left early. The kids cried. Daniel stormed off after slamming the door again. I stayed the night at Grandma's house, cleaning up dishes, putting leftovers in the fridge, folding napkins she had ironed just for this day. I slept in her guest room, hoping to hear the front door creak open. It never did. The next morning, she still wasn't home. Her bed was made. Her clothes were untouched. Her toothbrush was dry. Her phone, usually plugged in on the kitchen counter, was gone. So was her wallet. But there was no note, no message. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. I called my mom. She didn't answer. I called my uncle. He sounded annoyed. Finally, I drove around the neighborhood, searching parks, shops, even the old church she used to visit sometimes. I asked the neighbors, but no one had seen her. That's when the fear really set in. Not panic, something worse. Guilt! By the end of the day, the whole family was calling each other, trying to decide if we should go to the police. Some said it was too soon. Others said maybe she just needed a break. A few even said she was being dramatic. But I knew her. Helena wasn't impulsive. She wasn't reckless. If she left, it meant something. That evening, we all met at my parents' house. For the first time in years, everyone was in the same room. But this time, no one was laughing. The air was heavy. And that's when the doorbell rang. It wasn't her. It was a woman in a dark gray suit, holding a thick envelope with a gold seal. She introduced herself as a lawyer representing Helena. She said Helena had left instructions, a request. We were to meet at her office in 3 days for the reading of a private document. That's all she would say. I asked if Helena was okay. She just looked at me for a long second, then said gently, "I think you should come to the meeting." I remember clutching that envelope like it might hold answers. My family kept asking questions, but none of us had any. 3 days felt like forever. And in that time, none of us heard a single word from her. Not a call. Not a message. It was like Grandma Helena had disappeared. But somehow, she was still watching. That night I lay awake thinking of her lavender dress. Her trembling hands, the way she looked at Daniel. I thought of everything I didn't say. Everything we all ignored. And for the first time, I realized that maybe she wasn't the one who had disappeared. Maybe we had, and I had a feeling that whatever we were going to hear at that lawyer's office, it wasn't going to be what we expected at all. 3 days passed like a blur, and none of us knew what to do with ourselves. The silence in the family group chat was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a text from Grandma. Something simple like, "I'm okay." But nothing came. It was like she had been swallowed by the earth. Even Daniel, who pretended not to care, didn't post anything on his social media. That was the most disturbing part. Not the waiting, but the absence of any reaction. As if we were all frozen in place, afraid to say what we were really thinking. I spent most of those days at Grandma's house. I watered her plants, fed her cat, and sat in her favorite chair by the window, staring out like she used to. The house smelled like her, cinnamon, old books, and lavender lotion. I kept expecting to hear her slippers scuffling down the hallway, her voice calling me from the kitchen. But there was nothing, just the ticking of the old clock she loved so much. I cried once, in the middle of the night, when I found a note she had left on the fridge weeks ago that said, "Dinner at 6. Don't be late. Love you." When the day of the meeting finally came, I dressed in something simple but respectful. Dark jeans, a blouse Grandma once complimented. I didn't know why it mattered. Maybe part of me felt like she'd be there, watching somehow. The law office was in a tall building downtown, with polished floors and walls too white to feel comfortable. My parents were already in the waiting room when I arrived. So were my uncles and cousins. Even Daniel showed up, sunglasses on, chewing gum like none of this mattered. The receptionist led us into a large conference room with a long glass table and leather chairs. At the head of the table sat the lawyer, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice. She introduced herself as Ms. Alencar and opened a thick file in front of her. She didn't waste time. She looked around the room and said, "I want to start by saying I'm deeply sorry for your loss." That was the moment. The words that changed everything. My mother gasped. My uncle shouted, "What do you mean, loss?" But I didn't say anything. I already knew. I felt it in my chest. Miss Alencar explained that Helena had checked herself into a private hospice the night of her birthday. She had been diagnosed months earlier with a terminal illness, but chose not to tell anyone. She had passed away peacefully 2 days ago, alone. There were cries. "Protests!" My aunt accused the lawyer of lying. My father sat in stunned silence. Daniel got up and paced, muttering curse words. But I stayed in my seat, frozen. The image of Grandma walking out that night was now carved into my memory. She hadn't left in anger. She had left because she knew. She was saying goodbye in the only way she could. Ms. Alencar waited for the room to quiet before continuing. She said Helena had left specific instructions for each of us. Personal letters. She handed them out one by one. Mine was written in her handwriting. Shaky but familiar. It said, "My dear Clara, you always saw me. Thank you for your kindness. Please remember, love is not words. It's actions. And truth always comes in silence." That was it. No explanations. No last wishes. Just those few lines. Then came the part we hadn't expected. The lawyer cleared her throat and said, "Now I'll proceed with the reading of the will." Everyone straightened in their seats. Some looked nervous, others greedy. Daniel even smirked. He was probably already imagining how he'd spend whatever money she left him. But what came next shocked all of us. Helena had not left anything to the family. Not a single item. Not the house. Not the savings. Not the jewelry passed down from her grandmother. Every possession, every dollar had been left to an organization none of us had ever heard of. Casa Aurora. My uncle demanded to know what it was. The lawyer simply said it was a charitable foundation and gave us an address. The room erupted. Shouting. Accusations. Denial. Daniel stood up furious, calling it a scam. My aunt asked if she had been manipulated in her final days. My mother sobbed into her hands, but the lawyer remained calm. She explained that the decision had been made months before, legally documented, witnessed, and notarized. Helena's choice was clear and irreversible. I didn't say a word. I just kept looking at the name. Casa Aurora. It sounded warm, safe, like a place she would have loved. I had a feeling this wasn't just about charity. There was a reason she chose them. Something deeper. Something none of us had understood yet. The lawyer offered to schedule a visit to the foundation if we wanted more answers. I immediately said yes. Daniel scoffed and walked out. My father stayed silent, but I knew. I had to go. Because Helena had left us something, after all. A mystery. And I wasn't going to let her story end in that conference room. We drove to Casa Aurora 2 days later. The address led us to the outskirts of the city, where tall buildings gave way to quiet streets and old trees. The car ride was mostly silent. My mother sat next to me, staring out the window while my father drove, with both hands clenched on the wheel. Daniel didn't come. He said he had better things to do, but I knew the truth. He was embarrassed, maybe afraid, or maybe he just didn't care. Honestly, I didn't care what his reason was anymore. The building itself was simple but beautiful. An old restored mansion with pale yellow walls and white shutters, surrounded by a neat garden full of roses, sunflowers, and lavender. The gate was open. A wooden sign hung above the entrance. It read, Casa Aurora, light for those who wait. Just reading those words made my throat tighten. It felt like something she would say, something she would believe in. We were greeted at the door by a young woman, no more than 30. She wore jeans and a soft pink sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes were kind, but there was a strength behind them that caught me off guard. She introduced herself as Clara, the director of Casa Aurora. Yes, we had the same name. No, that wasn't a coincidence. I'd soon learn why. She invited us inside and offered tea. The interior was warm and filled with sunlight. Children's drawings hung on the walls. Laughter echoed from a distant room. The air smelled like fresh bread and something floral. It didn't feel like a charity. It felt like home. And I realized, suddenly, that this was where she had found peace. This was where she had chosen to spend her final days. Clara sat us down in a cozy room with a round table and told us everything. Casa Aurora was an orphanage, but not just any orphanage. It was built on the idea of dignity, love, and family. It took in children that even other shelters had turned away. The sick, the traumatized, the forgotten. And Helena had been their biggest supporter. She had been volunteering there for the past 3 years in secret. My mother gasped. She never told us. Clara smiled gently. She said her family wouldn't understand. That stung, because she was right. We hadn't seen her. We hadn't asked. We'd just assumed she was old and lonely and harmless. But here in this place, she had mattered. She had made a difference. Then Clara paused. Her fingers tapped lightly on the teacup. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "There's more. Something Helena wanted me to tell you. But I think it's better if I show you." She led us down a hallway filled with photographs. There were pictures of Helena planting flowers, reading to children, baking cookies, laughing with staff. I had never seen her so alive. But it was one photo that stopped me in my tracks. It was of Clara, younger, standing next to Helena, holding a birthday cake. Helena's arm was around her shoulder. The caption read, "My sunshine." I turned to her, confused. She took a deep breath. "I'm your cousin," she said softly. Helena was my grandmother too. The room tilted. My mother whispered, "No, that's not possible." But Clara nodded. "Your brother, your oldest, he was my father. He abandoned my mother before I was born. Helena found us years later. She helped my mom, and after she died, she helped me. She paid for my education, helped me build this place. But she asked me not to contact you." My mother covered her mouth with her hand. My father looked pale. And me, I felt everything and nothing at once. Shock, shame, awe, confusion. Clara was family. She had been right here this whole time. And Grandma had chosen her, trusted her, loved her, while we were too busy ignoring her presence at our own table. Clara continued. She didn't want to cause trouble. She just wanted to help. She said she had failed once and wanted to make it right. I realized then, this place, this home, this gift. It wasn't revenge. It was redemption. It was love passed forward, not withheld. She brought out a small box and handed it to me. Inside was a necklace, a silver chain with a tiny sunflower charm. I recognized it instantly. Helena had worn it every day for as long as I could remember. "She wanted you to have it," Clara said. Tears spilled down my face before I could stop them. I felt like I had lost her all over again. And yet, somehow, she was more alive than ever. Through Clara, through this house, through the children who called her Grandma Helena. We stayed for hours, listening to stories, walking the gardens, meeting the kids. My parents were quiet most of the time, taking it all in. There were no arguments, no excuses, just silence and understanding. I think we all knew this was her legacy. Not money, not things, but light, hope, family. On the drive home, my mother finally broke the silence. I didn't know she had so much love left to give. I looked out the window and whispered, "She always did. We just weren't paying attention." And for the first time in days, I didn't feel lost. I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. But what none of us knew then, what none of us could have predicted, was how Daniel's story would unravel next. The following week, I couldn't stop thinking about Casa Aurora. I went back twice on my own, bringing snacks, books, and supplies for the kids. The warmth of the place had wrapped around me like a second skin. I started helping Clara with small tasks, organizing donation records, reading to the children, watering the gardens that Grandma had once tended. Every corner of that house whispered her name. She wasn't just remembered there. She was alive in every detail. Meanwhile, things outside Casa Aurora were unraveling fast. My family, especially my parents, tried to avoid the topic of Clara altogether. I could tell they were ashamed, not only for how they treated Helena, but for ignoring the existence of her other granddaughter. My mother asked questions in private, mostly about Clara's mother. My father stayed silent, his guilt etched deep in the lines on his face. Daniel hadn't spoken to anyone since storming out of the lawyer's office. Then one morning, I arrived at Casa Aurora and found Clara sitting on the porch steps, holding a letter. Her hands were shaking. She handed it to me without saying a word. It was from Helena, a sealed envelope that had been left with the lawyer to be delivered only after our second visit. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. For Clara and Clara, my two sunflowers. We opened it together. The letter was long, written slowly and thoughtfully. She explained how she had found Clara years ago after receiving a letter from the girl's mother, her son's former partner. She'd gone to meet them in secret, wanting to help without reopening wounds in the family. She paid for their home, Clara's schooling, even helped start the foundation. And then came the words that broke me. "You, my sweet Clara, saw me when no one else did. You asked me how I was. You hugged me just because. And you, my darling other Clara, reminded me that love is never wasted, even when it's rejected." She ended the letter by saying she hoped we would one day sit side by side, just as we were now, and find comfort in the truth that none of us are ever truly alone. I clutched the letter to my chest, blinking back tears. Clara didn't cry. She just smiled softly, like someone who had carried a heavy secret for too long and could finally let it go. That day, Clara showed me a room I hadn't seen before. It was small, tucked away behind the kitchen. Inside were boxes filled with journals, recipes, photographs, and handmade crafts, all from Helena. This was her private space, her sanctuary. One wall was covered with pinned notes and letters from the children. Another had a faded quote written in marker. "Love, even when unreturned, changes everything." I read through her journals late into the night. She wrote about all of us, her family, her regrets, her joys. She even wrote about Daniel. She had hoped he would come around. She said he's angry because he doesn't know how to ask for love. That line stuck with me, because she wasn't wrong. Then came a knock at the door. It was Daniel. He looked different, tired. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, his expression hollow. He asked if we could talk. Clara didn't say anything at first. She just opened the door wider and stepped aside. I led him to the garden, the same one Helena used to care for. He sat on the stone bench and stared at the ground. "I messed everything up," he said. "I didn't mean what I said to her. I was just mad. I thought she was being clingy. I didn't know she was sick." His voice cracked. "I thought she'd always be there." I didn't comfort him. Not right away. I let him sit in that guilt. Then he told me everything. After the reading of the will, he'd gone back to his apartment and found out his bank account was overdrawn. He'd been living off loans and empty promises. His parents had stopped supporting him, and his job had fired him after too many no-shows. He was broke, alone, lost. He said he came to Casa Aurora because it was the only place Grandma ever smiled. He thought maybe there was something here for him, a second chance. Clara came into the garden. She listened quietly as he apologized again and again. Finally, she spoke. "You hurt her. All of you did. But you said what we were all too afraid to say out loud. And she still left this for us." Daniel looked up. "So what now? Can I stay here just for a while?" Clara hesitated. "This place is for those who have nothing," she said. "Not for those who wasted everything they had." I held my breath. Then she turned to me. "What do you think?" I wanted to scream yes, but I didn't. Instead, I asked Daniel a question. "Are you here because you're sorry? Or because you're desperate?" He didn't answer. Clara shook her head. "I'm sorry, Daniel. We can't help you. Not like this. You need to want more than a place to sleep. You need to want to change." Daniel stood up, nodded slowly, and walked out of the garden. I don't know where he went after that. None of us did. But I saw something in his eyes. Something raw and unfamiliar. A crack. A beginning. And even though Clara had closed the door, Helena's words stayed with me. Love, even when unreturned, changes everything. That was when I realized she hadn't just built a home here. She'd planted seeds in each of us. And now, it was up to us whether they would grow. It had been 2 weeks since Daniel walked out of Casa Aurora, and none of us had heard from him since. At first, we assumed he'd gone back to his old life. Found a couch to sleep on, sweet-talked someone into helping him. Bounced back like he always did. But as the days passed and his social media went quiet, and he didn't answer calls or texts, we started to wonder. Maybe this time was different. Maybe the fall had finally shaken him. I spent more time at Casa Aurora than I did at home. Clara and I became closer, like real cousins. We laughed together, cooked meals for the kids, cleaned the garden, and spent long evenings reading through Helena's journals. Every page felt like a piece of her soul. Gentle, wise, sometimes funny, always loving. I learned things I'd never known, like how she used to sing lullabies in Portuguese when she thought no one was listening, or how she kept a secret box of notes from each of us tucked under her bed. One night, I found a journal entry about me. She wrote, "Clara sees things others miss. She watches people the way I used to. I think she carries pieces of me in her heart." I cried silently, afraid of waking anyone, and held that journal to my chest like it was a heartbeat. I had wasted so much time not seeing her, and yet she had seen me completely. My parents finally visited the house one afternoon. My mom brought a tray of homemade cookies, the same kind Helena used to bake. She looked around the room slowly, pausing at every photo. My dad didn't say much, but he sat with one of the boys, teaching him how to play chess. It was quiet, and no apologies were spoken aloud, but I could feel them in the way my mother wiped the dust off a frame or how my father straightened the crooked picture on the wall. They asked to meet Clara again. This time they really looked at her. Not like a stranger, not like a mistake, but like family. There were no big speeches or dramatic hugs, just an invitation. Will you come over for dinner sometime? Clara said yes. I saw her eyes shine a little when she did. Meanwhile, Daniel's absence kept tugging at me. I hated him for what he said to Helena, for what he said to all of us. But part of me remembered the little boy he used to be. The one who helped Grandma hang ornaments at Christmas, who cried when she scraped her knee, who once made her a card with stick figures and glitter. Where'd that boy gone? I decided to find out. I started asking around. A few mutual friends said Daniel had sold most of his stuff and disappeared. Others said he was sleeping in his car. One said he'd been seen at a shelter near the edge of town. So I went there. The building was gray and crumbling, the smell of mold clinging to the walls. I walked through the halls, asking quietly, until someone finally pointed me to a corner in the back, near the heater. He was sitting there, knees pulled up, hoodie over his head, eyes closed. He looked like a ghost. When he saw me, he didn't speak. He didn't even look surprised, just tired. I sat beside him on the cold floor and said, "You disappeared." He shrugged. Didn't think anyone cared. I told him that wasn't true, and also that it kind of was. He laughed bitterly. Fair enough. He told me everything. After being cut off financially, he tried to flip some quick business deals. They failed. He lost more money, got evicted, slept in his car until it got towed, tried crashing at a friend's place but overstayed his welcome. Eventually he ended up here, too proud to call home, too ashamed to face what he'd become. I didn't know how much she mattered, he whispered. Not until it was too late. I wanted to yell at him, to throw all his cruelty back in his face. But instead I said she knew, and she still loved you. That broke him. He cried into his hands, the kind of sobs that shake your whole body. I hadn't seen him cry since we were kids. It was the most human I'd seen him in years. When I told Clara about the visit, she didn't say anything for a while. Then she asked, "Do you think he's ready to come back?" I shook my head. Not yet, but he wants to be. She nodded. Then we wait, like she did. That night, I reread Helena's final letter. There was a sentence I hadn't noticed before. Sometimes love means closing the door, and sometimes it means waiting beside it. The next day, Daniel showed up at the front gate. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood there, holding a bag of bread. Said he wanted to donate it. Clara met him on the steps. No speeches, no tears. She took the bag and said, "Thank you." Then he left. The next day he came back, this time with books. The day after that with soap and towels, little by little, without asking, without begging. He began showing up, always bringing something, always staying outside the gate. It was like penance, like a slow apology, and none of us told him to stop. Then one afternoon, Clara opened the gate before he could knock. "Do you want to help serve dinner tonight?" He looked stunned. Then he nodded and stepped inside. We didn't call it forgiveness. We didn't need to, because sometimes forgiveness isn't loud. It's just a door that stays unlocked. Daniel became a quiet presence at Casa Aurora. He never asked for attention, never explained himself, never complained. He just showed up every morning with something. A bag of rice, a carton of milk, a storybook for the kids. Then he'd help set the tables, sweep the floor, or fix a broken chair. The kids liked him. They didn't know who he was or what he'd done. They just knew he was funny, good at silly voices, and always brought candy on Fridays. Clara kept her distance at first. She watched him the way Helena used to watch all of us. Carefully, kindly, but never blindly. She didn't welcome him with open arms, but she didn't shut him out either. She gave him space to prove who he was becoming, not who he had been. And that space was what Daniel needed most. But the truth is, the road to redemption isn't a straight line. One rainy evening, I found Daniel sitting alone in the garden, his hoodie pulled over his head. He looked smaller than usual, like the weight of something invisible was pressing him down. "I messed up again," he said. He'd taken a loan from someone shady, trying to start a delivery gig. He promised he'd pay it back. Then his phone broke. He missed jobs. And now he was behind. The guy was threatening him. He didn't know what to do. And worst of all, he hadn't told Clara. He was afraid if she found out she'd throw him out for good. "I just wanted to be useful," he whispered. I didn't want to be the screw-up again. I sat with him for a long time, told him the truth, that being useful wasn't about grand gestures or fixing everything. It was about showing up, doing the work, staying even when things got hard. He nodded, but I could see it. The fear in his eyes, the old instinct to run creeping in again. 2 days later, he was gone. He left before sunrise. No note, no explanation. Just vanished, like Helena had, but without peace or grace. Clara was furious, heartbroken. She had started to believe in him, just a little, and now he'd thrown it all away. She shut herself in her office, and I couldn't blame her. I was angry too. Angry that he hadn't fought harder. Angry that he hadn't asked for help. Angry that he made us care. Weeks passed. Casa Aurora moved forward. New volunteers came. The children laughed. The days were full, but his absence lingered like a bruise you forget until something presses on it. Then one morning I got a call. A homeless shelter downtown had picked up someone who gave my name as an emergency contact. He had no ID, no wallet, and looked like he hadn't eaten in days. It was Daniel. When I got there, he was curled up on a thin cot, shivering under a worn-out blanket. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes bloodshot. He looked at me like he expected a slap. I just knelt beside him and whispered, "Why?" He broke down. He told me everything. After leaving Casa Aurora, he tried to fix his mistake, tried to pay the loan, get the delivery job back, sleep in the warehouse where he worked. Nothing worked. He was robbed once, beaten another time, and every night he thought of Helena, of what she'd said, of what she didn't get to say. "I thought I could do it on my own," he said, "but I can't. I need help." It was the first time he'd ever said that, and I knew this was real, not pity, not performance, just truth. I brought him back to Casa Aurora, not through the front gate, not yet. We sat on the curb outside, waiting for Clara to return from an appointment. When she arrived, she didn't look surprised, just tired. Daniel stood up, wobbling slightly, and said, "I'm not asking to come back. I just want to make it right, whatever that means." Clara didn't speak. She looked at him for a long time. Then she walked past us into the house. We sat in silence. Minutes later, the door opened again. She handed him a broom and said, "Start with the porch." He didn't cry, but I did. From that day on, he wasn't just visiting Casa Aurora. He was part of it. He didn't sleep there. Not yet. He still stayed at the shelter, took the bus every morning, and left late at night. But each day he worked harder. He fixed leaks, repainted walls, read stories to the kids, helped Clara with the accounting. He didn't ask for praise, and he didn't ask for forgiveness. He just showed up, and slowly, without anyone saying it, something changed. The kids asked where he was when he missed a day. Volunteers invited him to lunch. Clara started leaving notes on the whiteboard. "Daniel, don't forget to check the faucet or we need more markers. Ask Daniel." He became someone we could count on. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the garden, I asked him what he wanted now. He stared at the sky and said, "I want to be someone she would have been proud of." And in that moment, I believed he already was. But the truth about healing is, it doesn't erase the past. It grows beside it, like a vine wrapping around an old wound, holding it, not hiding it. And sometimes it takes a fall to teach you how to stand. That's what Helena had always known. And that's what Daniel was finally learning. Winter came slowly that year, brushing its chill across the windows of Casa Aurora, frosting the garden Helena once loved with silver mornings. The children bundled up in layers, still playing, still laughing, their joy immune to the cold. Inside, the warmth remained, not just from the radiators or the hot soup Clara made each day, but from something deeper, something that had been built brick by brick, soul by soul, a legacy of love, even when unreturned. Daniel still arrived each morning before sunrise, always carrying something. A loaf of bread, a box of crayons, a new broom. His steps had changed. He walked with purpose now, not swagger. His voice had softened. His silences spoke more than his words ever did. He was rebuilding himself, not with speeches or apologies, but with quiet, steady service. And the cracks in his armor, once hidden, had become windows where light could finally pass through. Clara didn't speak of the past much anymore. She didn't need to. The house itself had become a living memory. Of Helena, of forgiveness, of all the things that were broken and then carefully mended. Some days, Clara and Daniel worked side by side, exchanging few words but sharing the same rhythm. Trust had begun to bloom between them, slow, cautious but real. Then came the letter. It arrived one crisp morning in a plain envelope with no return address. Clara handed it to Daniel without saying a word. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the page. I watched as his hands trembled slightly. It was from a job placement program. A real one, legitimate, offering a training position in a kitchen for recovering young adults. A referral had been submitted. By Clara. He looked up at her, stunned. "You're ready," she said. That was all. He didn't accept right away. He spent 2 days thinking, walking through the garden, sitting by Helena's old bench. When he finally decided, it wasn't with fanfare. Just a nod, a small smile, and a whispered thank you that carried more weight than any speech. His last day at Casa Aurora as a full-time helper was quiet. The kids gave him cards they had drawn, with stick figures and hearts and messages like, "Thank you for fixing my chair and come back soon." Clara gave him a bag with snacks and a pair of gloves. I gave him Helena's old cookbook, the one with stained pages and notes in the margins. He held it like a sacred thing. We didn't cry, not then. But after he walked through the gate and turned the corner, Clara and I sat on the steps and let the silence speak for us. He called sometimes, not often, but when he did, it was with stories about new recipes, new friends, burnt bread, and missed buses. Real things, living things. He was building a new life, one quiet decision at a time. Spring came early the following year. Casa Aurora blossomed again, the garden alive with color. The kids ran barefoot through the grass. Volunteers painted murals on the walls. Clara and I planned a small celebration to honor Helena's birthday. Not a sad one, a bright one, with sunflowers and music and stories. And just before sunset, Daniel appeared. He looked older, not by years, but by experience. His eyes were clearer, his shoulders stronger. He brought a tray of cookies, Grandma's recipe, the one we thought no one else remembered. He made them from the book I gave him. They were slightly burnt, but perfect. That evening we all sat in the garden, candles glowing softly around us. Clara read aloud one of Helena's journal entries. "A family isn't who you're born to. It's who you keep showing up for." We toasted to her, to love, to second chances. Later that night, as the stars came out, I found Daniel sitting alone by the gate. He was watching the street, quiet. I sat beside him. "You ever think about that night?" he asked. I nodded. "Every day. I wish I could take it back." "You can't." "But you've done something better." He looked at me, questioning. "You stayed." He smiled faintly, then stood up, stretched, and offered me a hand. "Come on," he said. "There's still dishes to wash." And we walked back inside, because that's what this story became in the end. Not about what we lost, but about what we chose to become, together. And that's how a single moment of cruelty turned into a lifetime of lessons. My grandmother's silence spoke louder than any words, and through her strength, love, and quiet wisdom, we found our way back to what truly matters: each other. Daniel's fall wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something real. Casa Aurora lives on, not just as a home for those in need, but as a reminder that love, even when unreturned, can transform everything. If you made it to the end of this story, leave a comment below with the word sunflower, so I know you're one of the real ones. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss another story. Thank you for watching and for listening.